Are we really doing this? We're looking at Castlevania again? Alright. So, 20 years after the release of Castlevania The Adventure, Konami decided it was the perfect time to remake the game for Nintendo WiiWare in the form of Castlevania The Adventure ReBirth. Why? Who the hell would want a remake of quite literally the worst Castlevania game out there? Okay, well, me, obviously, because I bought it, but I mean, sure, it wasn't the only game they remade around this time. They also made Contra and Gradius ReBirth, but why The Adventure? Why not just remake the normal Castlevania instead of its weird, obscure, crappy handheld cousin? But maybe I shouldn't be so negative. After all, they have had 20 years to reflect on what they did so horribly wrong the first time. And the series did get better, admittedly before getting worse again, but there was some semblance of improvement going on there. Maybe if I'm lucky, the game will actually be good. At the very least, I can count on it being more interesting to look at. The game begins with a brief intro to the story, and at this point you really do not need me to tell you what it is. Mine's all in Japanese. Let's not ask why. And right off the bat, the music blew me away. If my ears were penises, they would be ejaculating constantly throughout this game. Wow, that is the most oddly specific and disgusting metaphor I think I've ever written down. It is hands down the best part of the entire game and is just the ultimate in fan service. For starters, to match the look and feel of the game, it sounds like a classic Konami soundtrack from their PS1 and arcade era games. So it uses like that powerful synth sound that every Konami game used back then. You know, like the pew pew. It sounds nothing like that. I don't even know why I tried. The songs are all remixes of older Castlevania songs. So what kind of songs would you expect in here? Vampire Killer? Bloody Tears? Theme of Simon? How about you slap that overused crap out of here, apart from maybe Vampire Killer because that is actually in this game, and replace it with the best songs of Castlevania's lesser known games. From Reincarnated Soul from Castlevania Bloodlines, and New Messiah from Belmont's Revenge, to super obscure and quite frankly weird choices, like the file load screen music from Castlevania Chronicles on the X68000 home computer that was only released in Japan but was then ported to the PS1, and Devil's Requiem from the super obscure Castlevania arcade game released in 1988. By the way, Devil's Requiem is the freaking high score table theme in that game. Like, what a strange choice. And how does it work as a level theme so well? Now this is a totally awesome lineup of tracks, and I get the feeling they chose the Adventure subtitle so that the game could be used as a celebration of all the lesser known Castlevania games. The only real complaint I have with the soundtrack is that when you set out to remake Castlevania The Adventure, then maybe, just maybe, it would have been a good idea to have at least one song from that game. Looking back, I'm wondering if remake was the right term for this game. Recreation might be more accurate as the game does not follow the original at all. The level structures are completely different. Thank God. It doesn't downgrade your whip when you get hit. Thank God. And best of all, it doesn't suck colossal bollocks. Thank God. It's your standard old 2D Castlevania game, so you whip the ever-loving crap out of bats through 6 exciting stages.
Wow!
There are so many things this game just does so right when compared to the original. For starters, the character no longer moves slower than my release schedule anymore. Oof. Sick burn there, me. I don't know why all the others couldn't have been this fast, but, well, I mean, it's not even that fast, but it's just so nice to be able to move so freely after suffering through Legends. The Flame Whip thing is still in the game, though this time round I never thought it was that helpful. It normally fades away like my hopes and dreams before it actually hits anything, and most of the time the thing it ends up hitting is a candle I didn't want it to. I'd say out of all the Castlevania games, it is probably most comparable to Dracula X. For better or for worse. I don't know though, it's weird. Despite trying to emulate the look and feel of a Super Nintendo or maybe even PS1 game, the gameplay seems to completely ignore most of the improvements the series had made up to that point. You can't switch out sub-weapons like in Dracula X. You can't whip diagonally like in Castlevania 4, but you can move in midair like Castlevania 4, and has branching level paths kind of like Wonder of Blood but on a much smaller level. It's a strange mix, which results in a game that manages to feel dated even for the time period the game is attempting to call back to. It doesn't even borrow much from the Adventure series, the only similarities being some of the enemies like the eyeballs, which are like, do you mind just not doing this? Thanks. So the gameplay is probably the best the series has had, but unless the level design can stack up to it, then it's all for nothing, and it is sadly for this fact that I can't bring myself to say it's better than Belmont's Revenge. Belmont's Revenge had a lot of platforming, which was good. It suited the game's control scheme and made it stand out from other Castlevania games at the time which were much more action orientated. ReBirth plays much more like a standard Castlevania game, being much more action orientated. There are definitely some platforming segments here, don't get me wrong, and they're just as good as they were in Belmont's Revenge. There's just a lot less of it. Not that a shift to an action orientated game is a bad thing. Hell, now that it's actually fast enough to support it, it makes sense they would do this. But I just don't think the levels are as memorable as they could be. It doesn't help that they are long as hell, like Jesus Christ. They might even be longer than the ones in Legends. Every level has a sub-boss and a boss at the end of it. That's 2 for anyone playing along at home. This can make some of the harder levels feel more like an endurance than something fun to play through. Thankfully, the bosses are easier than a slutty teenager on a Friday night. Like, golly, it sure would be bad if you, like, actually did something instead of just bouncing. Still, despite this, ReBirth can at least take pride in being the second best in the series, which doesn't sound too impressive when you consider that there's really only one other game in the series that is actually good, but woo, second place. The levels and graphics are also very appealing in sort of a retro way. The game was made in 2009, just 1 year before they released Lords of Shadow, but you wouldn't believe that unless you knew. It mimics the graphics of that era really well, even doing that thing that old consoles did where sprites that were rotated looked really distorted because of the resolution. I don't know if that's intentional, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it is so I don't feel like an idiot for writing that down. But in some places it mimics the art style a little too well, if you catch my drift. As in, sometimes the graphics are, wow, that looks really nice. And at other times it's like, wow, that's from Symphony of the Night. I don't know, it's not bad or anything, but you can definitely tell when the graphics have just been yoinked from the older games. Well, to be honest, I'm kinda struggling to think of much else to say about this game. Funnily enough, it gets quite difficult the 4th time you do it. Castlevania The Adventure ReBirth is quite an odd title, but one that I am very happy that exists. I would absolutely recommend it to any fans of the classic Castlevania games. It's definitely not as good as many of the older ones, but to get something like this, just a small, heartfelt project that clearly had a lot of love put into it, come out just before Konami started screwing the pooch so hard the tip came out the other side, I don't know, I just really appreciate it. If you're interested in the game, you can pick it up from the Nintendo Wii Shop channel, which is I think is still a thing. You can get it for 1000 Wii points, which funnily enough probably coincides with the amount of people who bought it, because who the hell buys WiiWare games? Oh wait, I did. Oh cool, an end card segment. Been a while since I forced myself to do one of these. So the Castlevania Adventure series is finally over. It only took me 3 years, but I'm finally happy I completed this little promise to myself. And indeed, a promise to all the people who expected I'd actually make these videos. Who am I kidding, I had like 50 subs when I started this series. Literally no one cared back then. But for those of you who do care now, thank you for sticking with me for so long. I hope I've managed to show you some Castlevania games you might not have known about. Well, my time here is just about up. It's time for me to succumb to the dark void of the screen fade out.